Welcome back to Recalibrate Agency. I'm your host, Danielle Photo. Pleased to have with me today Sarah Durham. She is a serial entrepreneur and the brain behind Compton Durham LLC. She's a fellow coach of entrepreneurs, especially agency owners. She has wrangled quite a few big names herself. So, Sarah, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Hey, Danielle, thanks for having me. Fun to be here. So I started my first agency, which is called Big Duck, when I was 24 years old. And I grew and ran that company over nearly 3 decades, built an incredible team of client relationships, worked very deeply in the nonprofit sector. It's an agency that specializes in nonprofit communications, and really, as part of my journey, managed dozens of people, did a lot of marketing and sales, loved that. And then in 2018, while I was still running Big Duck, I had the opportunity to acquire a second agency, a digital agency called Advomatic, which was a partner of Big Duck's. And I acquired Advomatic and I ran both companies for a few years. And then in 2021, I sold Big Duck to my employees. It became a worker-owned cooperative. And I sold Advomatic to a fabulous larger agency called Four Kitchens. And we went through sort of a merger process for Advomatic to absorb into Four Kitchens. So through those experiences, I learned a lot about running agencies and a lot about leadership. Like many agency owners, I have an art school background, not a business background, and also got very passionate about agencies and small business owners understanding what it means to exit a business or sell a business. And a lot of the coaching work I do right now is around that.
And that's exactly why we're talking today, too, is to really dig into how to mind your exit strategy and really think about that exit plan long before you actually need it, so that when you do need it, you already have it in place, you're already set up and ready to go. So let's start with something you wish you'd known to make your life easier, going through those different processes of exiting, doing some mergers, selling some agencies. What do you wish you'd known sooner?
Well, the truth of the matter is that most people who start businesses don't necessarily kind of think, oh, I'm starting a business. I should really think about the journey of this business and the life expectancy of this business. Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, has this quote, begin with the end in mind. And I think if more agencies got started with that question being asked, how are we going to exit? When do we want to exit? What should that look like? It would be very different. For me, I decided to exit my first business, Big Duck, probably about 10 years before I actually did. I set the intention to exit in about 10 years. And what I wish I had known a lot earlier was really uh, what that might look like not what the journey to get there would look like. I had some some great help figuring that out, but really, how do you exit a business? What are the options? What are the pros and cons of those options? I think that people tend to work with mergers and acquisitions people, M&A consultants, who have some skin in the game about how you exit your business, and there's actually so many other choices. So starting at the beginning by understanding some of those options, setting some intentions, finding one that really aligns with your personal goals and your values. I wish I had known that. That's part of what I'm trying to help folks with now.
Yeah. I mean, what are some of those other options other than an M&A?
Well, so, I think what a lot of people think about when they think about exiting is selling, and selling to probably another agency, or maybe they think about merging with another agency, which is actually also a sale. Usually there is one acquiring agency and one agency being absorbed in a merger. um, most agency owners don't really understand employee ownership options. There's several ways you can sell your business to your employees, and very few understand things like holding companies or roll-ups, or even considering the possibility of just taking a few key clients and going independent. I did some work recently with an agency owner where we figured out that actually they could exit their business much faster and much more profitably by just pocketing the cash, winding down the clients, hanging on to a couple of good client relationships, and walking away. that would actually be a lot faster, a lot easier, and potentially a lot more profitable than selling. So really looking at the whole landscape and figuring out the best approach.
That's such an interesting point you make, that a lot of agency owners don't tend to look at the option of winding down their client base and kind of doing that slow exit. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that we in capitalist America have really internalized a belief that selling is some sort of badge of honor, that when you sell your business, and you get to tell people you've sold your business, that is a metric of success. So I think for a lot of people, the idea of just shutting the door and walking away, or winding down over a period of time, sort of feels a little less maybe glamorous, or less like a marker of success. Although if you really, focus on what your personal goals are, or your financial needs are, it might sometimes be the best option.
Absolutely. And I think you're spot on. It's a quote unquote success marker, but there's a lot of those success markers that aren't actually always indicators of success. I mean, being bigger, like running a 200 plus headcount agency, not always better, but that's how a lot of people define success. Same thing with profitability, not always better, not necessarily meaning that you're going to be resilient and actually able to withstand the changing of the marketplace either. So, what are some of the other kind of false markers, we'll say, of success that we can start to rethink when we're evaluating how to proceed with our agencies and how to look at their exit strategies?
Well, yeah, first of all, I really want to, like, lift up something you just said that I 100% agree with, which is the fallacy that bigger is better. You know, I saw this in my own agency life, and now I see it with a lot of the agencies that I coach. Some of the most profitable businesses I've ever seen are two-person shops, three-person shops, not the 50 people shops. They tend to really struggle, and they tend to make a lot of compromised decisions because they're carrying such huge amount of overhead. Um, so I do think that's a big one. I think another fallacy that people carry around that really holds them back is about what um, what sort of business they are running. Harvard Business Review published this thing that was interesting about the difference between a hobby business, a lifestyle business, or a business that's desirable to sell. And I think a lot of people are really running hobby businesses and lifestyle businesses. And if you ever want to sell your business, that's not going to work. It can't be a business that crumbles when you step away. You cannot hold all the relationships. You need to build systems and processes and teams that, where it's a kind of a well run machine that isn't dependent on any one person, or any one thing. So I don't think this is a conscious choice, but I do think that a lot of entrepreneurs build businesses that are really built around them and their unique talents, and that's awesome when you're starting a business, but in the long run it leads to a lot of burnout and makes it harder to exit.
Well, especially too in the agency space, thinking of creatives, you are successful as a creative because people like your style, they like what you do. And so when you try to build a business around that, it can be very difficult. Would you agree? Would you add? Would you, assert something different to that point?
I do agree. I went to art school. I started my business as a designer, and I did a lot of writing, and I was very invested in being hands-on and creative. And one of the first and probably most challenging moments of letting go for me as I was building my team was not doing the creative work anymore. And I had to find new outlets for my creative energy, which I did, that I think I actually turned out to be better at than the creative work. But I do think it is very hard. One of the things that I was told by a consultant years and years ago, early on in my agency life, is that my standards for the creative work were probably a lot higher than my clients' standards for the creative work. And that's a tough pill to swallow too. If you're a creative person, you want everything to be incredible. But if you're working super hard to make something this good, and really your client's just as happy if it's this good and you can get it done faster and more profitably, you have to decide where you're going to come out with that, if you can live with that.
Yeah, the business level decision as opposed to the creative level decision.
Yeah, that's challenging. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer there. I coach people who are all in on the best quality, and I coach people who are all in on a profitable business, and both work in different ways. So I think it's very much about, you know, really thinking about what kind of business you're trying to run and build.
Mhm. And thinking about it over the long term, right? It's more than like 3 or 5 years. It's actually the 10 years, the 20 years down the road. So what do the day-to-day functions of your current business and your day-to-day operations have to look like if you're planning for 20 years or 10 years down the road?
Yeah. So when I'm coaching folks on thinking about their exit, I often encourage them to begin with the end in mind. I've done some work with younger businesses around this, but also, 10 years is a great timeline. 20 years is tricky because you just don't know what the world's going to be like in 20 years. It's a little bit unpredictable. But I think what's really important at any point when you're thinking about exiting is to begin thinking about it and to begin working towards it well before it's upon you and you're desperate to get out. So the worst time to start thinking about exit planning is when you need or want to retire. You need to stop working and you need to pull money out of your business and you're burnt out and you need to do it now. That your options are extremely limited. If you start planning years in advance, you have the ability to focus on two key things that are the primary levers that set your business up for success. The first is the financials, running a business that is profitable, where you're paying yourself a normalized salary, where the numbers look good and make sense, and somebody else can actually read the numbers and see how the business works and potentially take over that business and do all the things you've been doing. So there's nothing in the numbers that's kind of just like, again, unique to you. Like you're doing an incredible essential volume of work and you're not paying yourself. Like that financially, that doesn't look good to a buyer. Um, the other area that I think is really important to work towards over time is operational stability. So, how does the business operate without any one person? And it's not just you, it might be a key employee being essential to its success. How does your marketing machine run? How does your sales machine run? How do you do your creative work, your strategic work? Do you have things written down and processified? Do you have metrics and dashboards? Like all that kind of stuff, when you're smaller, maybe you can be a little less formal about it, but certainly as you grow past, maybe 5, 6, 7 people, it's really important to build a business that isn't wholly dependent on one person and their superpowers.
Absolutely. And I want to take one phrase that you've been using, which is planning. And I want to kind of dig into what it looks like to actually be planning and look at it from a habits perspective. Because to plan something, you're actually also doing the same process of building habits. So, what would you say are some of the habits and behaviors that you need to start integrating sooner than later into your agency if you want to have a good, solid exit plan for down the road?
Yeah. Well, I love that you're bringing up planning because I am a huge fan of planning and I love planning personally. I believe that when you plan, what you're doing is kind of setting a destination, and you can't sail towards a destination unless you've set the destination. So I'm a big advocate for planning. I think I would answer your question a little differently though. One of the things that I did, and I don't know that I would call this a habit, but that it was really important to be sailing towards the destination in a purposeful way for me, was I had both the ability and the good fortune to hire some exceptional people in my companies. At Big Duck, for instance, I had two women, Elizabeth Ricca and Farah Trumpeter, that I hired, a long time ago, probably 12, 13 years before I sold. And they became thought partners and leaders in the business. There were other people who were leaders in the business too, but they, for me, became my confidants. And so one of my habits was being very transparent with them. So 10 years before I wanted to sell, I said to them, hey, I just did some personal planning and I think I'm going to want to exit, in 10 years. And I want to maintain a conversation with you both about what that would look like and what that could look like for you. When I sold the company to my employees, everybody had the option to buy in as a worker owner, but Liz and Farah are now the co-directors of Big Duck. So they today are running the business. And they ran huge parts of it when I was there. They're both just exceptional leaders. So I think that is maybe about not doing it all on your own, not just keeping it all in your head, and a way to build some accountability and to distribute information and distribute power, which I think is really important.
It is important, also scary, distributing power, especially. So, can we talk about that a little bit, Sarah? What are some ways to start distributing power without the ship sinking?
I have to say my experiences with this were so positive, and I think again, I was fortunate and strategic in hiring great people. I consistently found that there were lots of people that I could bring into my businesses who were awesome and much better at the things I was doing than I was. So, when you're doing the thing, you're protective of how it's done. And when you give the thing to somebody else to do, you have to trust that they can do it. But once you see that they can do it maybe better than you can, certainly differently than you can, you have to make peace with, like, it's not going to be the same thing you would do. But it's really inspiring. I have learned so much from watching folks that I've worked with and hired over the years develop their own skills, teach other skills. It's just phenomenal. I think that's one of the best parts of running an agency, honestly. So maybe the shift that people have to make or be focused on is to embrace the people that they work with an abundance mentality rather than a scarcity mentality. There is a lot to do. There is a lot of power to have, and we can share it. We can all do good things. you know, one of the
Absolutely.
one of the great experiences I had at Big Duck was a few years after I hired Farah Trumpeter. Farah is an incredible, dynamic person, charismatic speaker, a real extrovert. I am not. She loves to go to conferences, speak at conferences, write, do all that stuff. So she started doing that. And a couple of years into doing that, first of all, it was great for the business, brought in lots of new business, great for me because it meant I didn't have to do all of that. And a couple of years into that, somebody said to me, does it bother you? A lot of people think that Big Duck is Farah's company. And I was like, no, that's awesome. Like, the fact that she's so invested and she's out there, that's great. That benefits me. So I think you
Yeah.
have to you have to be okay with things like that.
Yeah. Well, and especially for introverted business owners, I love that you brought that up because I'm such a strong proponent for people being engaged in speaking events and making sure that there is a face of the brand, even if it's not the owner.
Yeah.
And so distributing the marketing of your agency as well and the business development efforts, so critical. And by distributing some of those responsibilities, you're also allowing your team members to take ownership in the outcomes of the agency too, which I think really does tie into your long-term exit strategy because you're building something that's going to last because people are bought into it, right? They're
Yeah.
not just a cog in a machine, but you're building something that's scalable, it's repeatable, and they're invested in it, which I think is the magical secret sauce that everyone's trying to achieve. Hard to do for sure because finding the right people is the biggest part of that equation for sure. So, do you have any tips on that front?
Hmm. Um, I don't. I mean, I have hired a lot of people, and I guess the piece that I can't quite quantify does come down a little bit to gut, but I guess my maybe there is one tip, which is I think it's really important when you're interviewing people and hiring to really listen for where they are in their life and their career and what their trajectory is, and to not try to impose your fantasy on them about who they are or what they could do for you, but really to listen carefully to what they are looking for, and to look for how does this position align with where they want to go. So if I'm interviewing somebody who in the interview process says, one day I want to start my own agency, and I'm hiring them for a job where they're going to learn a lot about working in an agency, that's a good fit. They're going to be interested in that. It aligns with their goals. But if I'm hiring them in a job where they're not going to see anything about how an agency works, and they're going to potentially not be doing particularly fun or good stuff, they're not going to love that. They're not going to stay long, you know.
Yeah.
So I think really listening to where people are and trying to see if you can find a place for them that is truly gratifying for them. And
Hmm.
that's when the magic happens.
For sure. If you're interested in that topic, you can go listen to Wayne Pelletier's episode as well. He
Mhm.
dives into that a little bit more and how he views it, which is very similar, Sarah, to how you view it. He goes into some other examples too, but that's spot on. Is because the people make the place, you have to make sure that the place is where they're going to want to be.
Totally.
So yeah, listening for that, asking questions. So, like, actually designing your interview process around uncovering some of that information, which is not typical. People aren't usually prepared to be that transparent and open and, kind of share their personal vision for their life. So, it might be a little bit weird for them, but that's the information that you're really going to need to make a good long term decision, too. Um, what are what are some things I want to shift over to your team and what you're up to these days, Sarah? So, what are some things that you're working on these days or that you're launching that you're really excited about?
Yeah, so now in my third business as an executive coach, I have the great privilege to be kind of the pit crew for other people in their leadership, which I love. I'm working on all kinds of fun things in that, but one of the things I'm about to launch in the late summer of 2023, early fall, is a group for people who run businesses that they're hoping to exit at some point in the future, not tomorrow in the future, but maybe 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And it's going to be a cohort where people will learn all about the options, learn how to do it, kind of get their arms around it so that they can run their businesses with intention to be ready to exit the way they want when they want. So I'm really excited about that. And and honestly, I'm just, really thankful for the opportunities I had and the support I got, and very happy to be able to sort of be on the other side of the table supporting people who are coming into their own as leaders today. It's not an easy time to be a boss or be a leader. And so I'm glad to be kind of, as I said earlier, the pit crew.
Very important role for sure. And Sarah, I want to thank you for coming on today and sharing your wisdom and your thoughts with everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And to kind of round out today's episode with a few key takeaways, I want to really spotlight Sarah's emphasis on the fact that you have to know where you're going in order to be stepping in the right direction today. So sit down, think for yourself, what does this look like for me personally? Where do I want this business to have taken me 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? And then don't be afraid to share that with the key players on your team. Get their insights, get their input, and get them thinking about ways to actually make that a reality too. Because it's not going to happen overnight, but burnout definitely can happen overnight. So you definitely want to plan for this before you burn out or before you needing to just pull cash out or something else comes up in life. So you want to plan for that. Another thing that Sarah really mentioned closer to the beginning of this episode was how you have more options than selling your agency. and you have more options than being acquired or merging with other agencies too. So don't be afraid to investigate those options and look at true success metrics, not the fake success metrics that society wants to impose on you and your business. Look at what actually is going to define success for you, for your team, and for you personally. And that's all I have for you today on Recalibrate Agency. I'm your host, Danielle Photo. Cheers, till next time.